Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly study in the book of Judges. We are in chapter 13, and you can see on the map on the screen right now that I'm going to take my cursor and be somewhat near the middle lower part, and this chapter 13 sets the stage for, I think, one of the greatest judges that we're going to come across, and that is Samson. And we're going to see that he gets 3 chapters devoted to him. And if you'll notice that just above him, Abdon was the last judge that we left off with as we closed out chapter 12. So moving into chapter 13, Samson is down here closer to the Bethlehem, Jerusalem uh, area in the midst of the nation of Israel. So, what's interesting here, and as you can see the verse on your screen now, we go to the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. I'm going to look at the Hebrew just to give you a little bit of insight here. What I find interesting is that they were spending 40 years in the hand of the Philistines, which was a punishment from God. Um, that is a long time. Some of the previous judges that we've studied, the time that they were in this captivity or being oppressed by these other groups was much shorter. It was just, maybe 5 years, 8 years. I think one was maybe 10. But here we have 40 years that they are delivered into the hand of the Philistines. And what else do you notice here is that there is nothing saying that because of this heavy oppression, the Israelites cried out unto God, or because of how terrible things were, they cried out unto God, and so God would send a deliverer. That is all missing from this narrative, which kind of gives us the indication that they didn't feel they had it so bad. Because they're not crying for a deliverer, but God is delivering them anyway. So, going to the Hebrew, it's Vayosifu is and again. And that is what's missing from the English. The English just says and, but here it's like and again. You can almost hear just the exasperation in God's voice as this verse is coming out and saying, and again, the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh. I think a special note here that this is the merciful and compassionate side of God that's being assaulted, um, that God's heart is being broken because of what is happening. And another thing that you'll notice, of course, they were delivered by the hand of Yahweh and His mercy again. Something again we struggle with is that when punishment comes, when times like this come, that this is not God's anger and his wrath. This is his heart being broken. And it is a last recourse. It is finally giving in to what the people are really desiring to do, but it's not what God desired to do. And then you'll notice at the end of this first verse is the letter P or Pe. In Hebrew, it is a punctuation mark, and it is here in the Hebrew, and again, not translated into English, but it's a statement that the writer wants you to stop, wants you to take a pause, wants you to think about what is going on, that there is a lot of weight behind this verse in the Hebrew that has a lot of meaning here, and we're not supposed to just jump ahead into verse 2, even though in the English, we don't gather that type of weight of heaviness, but in the Hebrew it is definitely there that God wants you to stop and to think about this a little bit. So we go to verse 2. This is God intervening, sending a deliverer, even though the Israelites didn't ask for one, even though they seem to have been tolerating this type of oppression and not crying out for a deliverer. God intervenes in his mercy before they get too far gone and there's no way to get them back. And so there is a man from Zorah, family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. His wife was barren and bare not. Kind of interesting, this double negative here. We're going to look at it in the Hebrew. And it said she was barren and had no children. And so the word for barren is not there twice, as it is indicated in the English, but it is barren and had no children. This would seem like is a pretty obvious statement. Why would you have to repeat this twice? What stuck out with me is this seems to be a very common narrative that we noticed through the Hebrew Bible. And so it stopped me and so the question here was, how many other times can you think of a similar scenario where there's a woman not able to have a child? Sarah, Abraham, we are going to get to it a little bit later, but it will be Samuel and his mother Hannah. But then also, it seems to be maybe not a barren situation, but a situation of Mary and Jesus, where an angel appeared to the woman, telling her that she's going to have a child. So there's a number of things here. I believe also Rebecca and Jacob, where she couldn't conceive. So this seems to be a very common narrative going through. And so that piques our curiosity and also shows us how God works, and He's working through women. Again, the Bible is very male narrative dominant, but yet it is quite interesting to see that even though we know at that time, because of the culture, it wasn't God's intention to marginalize or minimalize the role of a woman. And so you will see that even though the culture at that time was very male dominant, in fact, the Bible doesn't even record her name here, records the husband's name as Manoah, but not her name. And so, but yet the angel appears to the woman, not to the husband. What's also interesting here is the word Manoah. You might notice the word Noah inside of this. This is a word that means rest. It's not a very commonly used word. And so there's significance in the name also, and that the name of the husband was portrayed here to show that God is still wanting to bring a rest to his people. And again, that narrative continues all the way through the Hebrew Bible and even into the New Testament, where the goal that God is trying to bring us is rest. And that's the role of the Holy Spirit, to bring rest and comfort, and then ultimately in the future, when we pass from this life or the Lord decides to take us home, rest is what the target destination is, rest is what the goal is. So you can see these threads starting here, starting and interwoven throughout all of the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. So we get to verse 4. Actually, verse 3, the angel appears and says unto the woman. Again, we're going to look at the Hebrew because it just helps us a little bit here. Verse 3 starts, Vayera malach is the word used for angel. Well, what's interesting here is there is not a word for angel in the Hebrew Bible that is specifically targeted to just what we would think of as an angel, as this heavenly being with the halo and the wings and the shining white clothes. The Bible uses the word of a messenger, and that is the only word used in the Hebrew Bible, Hebrew language, for what we think of and what is sometimes translated as an angelic being. So this word malak is used 101, 76 times, 24 times. 76 of the time it is translated as messenger. Um, 101 times plus 9, so 110 times. It's translated as angel or angels. It's an ambassador. It's a messenger over 100 times. The purpose here behind the meaning of the word is to be someone who is on a mission, someone who is given on a mission. And so this being is on a mission. And look at the next word here is Yahweh. It's a mission of the merciful attributes of God. And so what we find interesting here and where we're going to focus on this lesson is how did she know this was a malach? How did she know it was a messenger? What did she see? What were the physical characteristics that spoke to her as to what kind of being this was? We all have interests in this. We believe that there are angels. The Bible tells us in the New Testament that angels are given to those who are to inherit the kingdom, those who are sons of righteousness, as I believe it's spoken of in the book of James. That's where the thought of a guardian angel comes in. Um, but yet it is a mystical, mysterious concept that we don't know a lot about. Many people will claim to have seen angels. There's all kinds of angelology out there of people who have little figurines of angels all through their houses. Some of them even worship angels. They seek after angels. The Bible doesn't ever tell us to engage in such things, and it just talks about them as messengers. So I'm pointing that out just to give us an understanding that these are messengers from God that can take many different forms. And so we want to look here as to what did this woman see? So verse 3, it says this messenger of Yahweh appears to this woman, starts to talk to her, tell her she's barren, obviously knows that, and knows she's going to bear a son. And then we get to verse 4, looking at the language of how this messenger speaks to this woman. And he says, Ve'ata Hisham Marie, and then he uses the word na. This word na is not used very often in the scriptures. It is a word that means please. It is very heavily weighted towards politeness. And you'll find the Hebrew language is not a very polite language. It's kind of a more direct language that just says it without a lot of flowery adjectives. Remember, there are only 7,500 words in the Hebrew language compared to over 1 million in English. And so there's not a lot of flowery expounding of words, not a lot of adjectives. So when you see the word na here, you get the understanding that this is going to extra lengths to tell us that a very kind, gentle conversation is taking place. So this angel or messenger is appearing to this woman and speaking and saying, he shamar, the word is shamar, which means to guard. Please guard, and using the word na in a very gentle phrasing, that this child would not drink wine and not engage in strong drink. And the ideology here is that this drink would not be one that would cause them to become intoxicated. So that's the realm of understanding here, is that nothing to impair the judgment or nothing to impair the mind to intoxicate this child, and also to not eat anything that's unclean. Now, this is kind of interesting that the angel would have to admonish not to have anything um, unclean. And actually, this admonishment is not just to for the child, but it's also for her, that she would also refrain from anything that would intoxicate her and anything that would be unclean. And of course, many denominations, you know, do not condone the use of anything that would be an intoxicant because from this very reason here of impairing judgment, of causing them to behave in ways that would be leading to um, a life or an action that would bring sin or condemnation into their life. And of course, with really a challenge for every person is to know, when does intoxication take place? For some people, it can be um, quite a long period of time that, it doesn't they can drink something, and depending upon the alcohol level of the beverage, they may not feel they're intoxicated. For someone else, it may just be one drink would do it. And so it's a very challenging thing to deal with. Some denominations avoid it altogether by just saying avoid any kind of alcohol, because you don't know when you're going to pass that line. And most people don't have the uh, a judgment, or the wherewithal, I'm looking for the right word here, the ability to know when to stop, I guess is it. But yet the Bible doesn't give us those guidelines. It just says here not to become intoxicated. And so it says, don't drink any strong drink, don't become intoxicated, for you will conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. This is another interesting part here, is this has to be being told about a Nazarite. Now, we want to make sure we're not confused with Nazarene. Jesus was a Nazarene because he lived in the area of Nazareth, and so he is a Nazarene. Um, Jesus was not a Nazarite, even though many pictures will show him with longer hair. The Bible does not say that he was a Nazarite, because a Nazarite was something that was not normally a permanent condition. It was normally something that was taken on for a short period of time. You'll find that the Apostle Paul took on to himself a Nazarite vow, which again is another interesting topic to talk about, where he did it for normally 30 days was the length of time for a Nazarite vow. And also part of the Nazarite vow that we'll maybe come across sometime in the book of Leviticus was that they would abstain from any intoxicating beverage for those 30 days. And then at the end of the 30 days, they would shave their head, remove all the hair that had grown, and then give an offering and move on and from that vow. But here, this child was very unique in that this angelic being says that he would be a Nazarite for all the days of his life. And you'll find that with Samson, this involved his hair, and that's the subject of the story. Now, what's interesting here is the going to verse 6, that then the woman, after meeting this messenger, comes and tells her husband, and look at how she describes this being. Says, "A man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel, very terrible. And I asked him where he was, but he didn't tell me his name." So there's some really interesting things here. First, there was no narrative that she spoke to this angel and asked him his name. But then she says it was a man of God. So let's just take a look at the Hebrew and see if that gives us any indication in verse 6. And so verse 6 says, um, Vatavo, nothing special there. Ha Isha, the woman, Vatomer, spoke, and then Le Isha, the husband, lemor. These are just standard words for husband, standard words for speaking, lemor. And then to describe it, she calls him Ish Ha-Elohim. So this is the standard word for man, although in Hebrew there is another word for man called Adam, which is where the word Adam comes from, which would describe the earthly, more sensual, carnal side of man. She's obviously recognizing that this person is not that way, but is an Ish, which is the more genteel, kinder, more refined, more uh, benevolent side, but yet she calls him an Elohim. She doesn't recognize the Yahweh or the merciful side. She's recognizing this as a powerful, strong man, but yet he seemed to be nice to her, and says, Ba Eli came to me, Umaehu, his countenance, and then repeats the word again. Notice the word countenance is repeated twice. So something about the, this being's countenance stuck out to her, that she would repeat it twice, that his countenance, and then uses the word malach ha-Elohim. And then she uses the word Norah, which is here translated awesome. But you remember in the English King James is translated as very terrible. Well, the Hebrew does not say very terrible. The word Norah really means awesome, which could be incredibly powerful, incredibly striking. And so there is really nothing here that is saying that she was so fearful. It doesn't say she screamed out of terror. It doesn't say she freaked out and, ran in circles and tried to run away, or was paralyzed in fear. It gives the indication that it was a very powerful countenance. It was something that stood out, that she recognized that this was a man of God, but she really didn't I wasn't totally sold on who this was or what it was, and that she didn't know, where he came from or what his name was. And so these are very interesting questions that she thought or wanted to ask of this being. She obviously felt empowered enough to ask these questions and didn't feel like she was dumbstruck, with fear. Um, but yet felt bold enough that she could ask these questions. And so that's where we're going to leave all those wonderful thoughts with you today at the end of this verse 6. And we're going to pick up next week with trying to decipher, what was this being like? What did she see? What did she feel? And you think about these and see if we come to similar conclusions, or maybe we won't come to any conclusion as we come back next week to pick up from here. So God bless all of you. Take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.